Hey everyone, in this video we're going to go through the derivation of the quadratic formula. Remember that the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And we defined b squared minus 4ac as the discriminant, and we use that value for a lot in this course so far. But this was the quadratic formula. We used it to solve quadratic equations. Usually we try to factor first. If that didn't work, then we use the quadratic formula. Now we have another technique to solve a quadratic equation, and that's completing the square. And our goal in this video is to understand how the quadratic formula is just a simplification of completing the square, because we can use it, completing the square that is, to derive the quadratic formula. So let's look how that's going to work. So solve the following quadratic equation by completing the square. So we have a general ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 quadratic equation. And this aligns exactly with what we used in the quadratic formula, right? The coefficient of x squared was a, coefficient of x was b, and the constant term was c. So if we're going to complete the square, we're going to start by putting a set of parentheses around ax squared plus bx. Now there's a coefficient of x squared, so we have to factor that out. So then we have x squared plus b, it's a weird b over ax plus something plus c minus something equals 0. Okay, so first thing, we want to take half of b over a, so 1/2 of b over a is b over 2a, and we're going to square that, so that's b squared over 4a squared. Now to figure out what we're subtracting, we have to think about the a that we factored out. So if we multiply a to b squared over 4a squared, we would just get b squared over 4a. Right, the a in the numerator and the a squared in the denominator would simplify with one another. Okay, so now we have to factor this perfect square trinomial, and that looks really difficult. But if we remember, the factor is going to be b over 2a. So we have x plus b over 2a squared. Now in order to combine these terms, we need a common denominator. So c is going to become 4ac over 4a. Okay, so that means I have plus 4ac minus b squared all over 4a equals 0. Now you might be looking at it at this point going, that looks really complicated. And it does at this point. But things are going to start to happen pretty quickly and clean up really nicely. Okay, so as long as you're just watching along and you understand each step that I did, that's really the important part. Okay, so we're going to subtract this to the other side. So we have a times x plus b over 2a squared equals the negation of 4ac minus b squared over 4a. Now, to clean this up, I'm going to take this -1 and distribute it into the numerator. So that's going to give me a times x plus b over 2a squared equals b squared minus 4ac over 4a. Okay, well that actually is really nice. b squared minus 4ac, that's the discriminant. Okay, so doing something right so far. Next we have to get rid of the a, that's the coefficient, before we take the square root of both sides. So let's multiply both sides of the equation by 1 over a. Okay, so that's going to give us x plus b over 2a squared equals b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared Now we can take the square root of both sides here, becomes the absolute value of x plus b over 2a equals, well, we can rewrite this as the square root of b squared minus 4ac over the square root of 4a squared. Square root of a fraction is the same as the square root of the numerator over the square root of the denominator. And the square root of 4a squared is 2a. So we have the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So then I have x plus b over 2a equals the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And I also have the negation of x plus b over 2a equals the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Okay, so again, looks really complex, but I see a lot of the parts of the quadratic formula. I see the discriminant, I see the 2a that's in the denominator, then we have two equations, so we're probably going to get that plus minus that we should get. So here we'd have x equals negative b over 2a plus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Notice they have the same denominator, so I can write that as one term. Negative b plus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Here we can divide both sides by -1 first. So x plus b over 2a equals the negation of the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And we can subtract, and they'll have a common denominator as well. So I'll just combine them in one step. So negative b minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And I can combine these answers to x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That is the quadratic formula. So all the quadratic formula is someone took the time to do this workout for you, and they gave you the end result. So instead of completing the square every time in general, they said, okay, we'll do it for you, and here's this formula. We're going to call this the quadratic formula. So really, it's nothing more than the simplification of completing the square. Now, you won't ever be responsible for deriving this on your own, but I think it's important to understand that quadratic formula and completing the square are related to one another. The quadratic formula is just the simplification of the technique of completing the square. Hey, so that was the video. Watch it over if you want to see any of the parts again, but more than anything, it's just an exercise to connect completing the square to the quadratic formula and also review the quadratic formula. Click the Amazon link down below for my algebra workbook so you can practice on your own. Give the video a like, and before you go, click that subscribe button so you can see more videos just like this. Thanks for watching.